Ainissa Ramirez. You are a material scientist, a speaker, and a science evangelist. You have written 3 books about science, and your latest one is called The Alchemy of Us: How Humans and Matter Transform One Another. Ainissa, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Anissa, I'm so happy your name is Spanish because usually I had to practice several times. So how do I pronounce this name? But yours, it just comes right dancing out of my tongue. No problem.
It sounds beautiful. Thank you for saying it so perfectly.
Okay, so you are a science evangelist. You have written 3 books. I would like to know, when is it that you started flirting with science? When is it that you fall in love and you say, I had to become a scientist?
Oh, well, I actually fell in love very early. I fell in love at 4, and it was because I was one of these kids who took things apart and I asked a lot of questions. And then I found out later from the adults that this is what a scientist does. And I said, well, that's what I want to do. And then there were some television programs that I really loved growing up, like the $6 Million Man and the Bionic Woman. They were all about science and technology. And then there was a local television program that had kids solving problems. It was called 321 Contact. And one of the kids was an African American girl. I'm African American. And when I saw a smart girl asking questions and I found out that she was doing science, then I was sold. So I wanted to be a scientist since I was very, very young.
Okay, and people didn't try to make you play with Barbie instead of toys that are more science gear?
Oh, yeah, there was definitely a time where people would always give me dolls. And I had 2 younger brothers, and I always wanted the toys that they got. They would get trucks and things to take apart. But eventually, the adults finally figured out that this one is a curious one. So they gave me a chemistry set, and I had a bike, and I really loved these things. And so eventually it took some time. I still got dolls, I still got dresses, but eventually they started realizing that they had a burgeoning scientist in their midst.
Well, okay, and then how did that transform into a career?
Well, I knew one of my favorite topics when I was in school, in grammar school, was science. So I said, well, I'm going to be a scientist. So I took, when I was in high school, I took all the science classes I could take and all the math classes that I could take. And when I got to college, I knew very early on I wanted to take science. And so I studied engineering. And that's pretty straightforward. As soon as you arrive, you have to take all these classes. They kind of set it up for you. It's like a menu. You get this and this and this, and you really don't have that many choices. So once I kind of made the decision when I went to college, it was pretty streamlined to get through the process. But getting through those courses, now that's another story. Those courses were extremely hard.
Okay, well, you just mentioned that you are African American. So first of all, we don't see that many women in science. If you, I mean, I remember when I was taking computer classes, there were only a few women in my classroom. So how, uh, and then you are African American. So I wonder if you had to work twice as hard to get the same results or the same recognition or the same grades or whatever, or the same jobs as your counterpart white male scientists.
I had to work tremendously hard. I would walk into a classroom and it wasn't expected that I was going to succeed because there were just so few African Americans and so few women. And I knew of many women who dropped out, and I know many African Americans who dropped out. In fact, when I went to Brown, there were 9 of us, 9 African American students who kind of hung out and did engineering, and 4 graduated at the end. So that's a small number, and then that's a very large number of people who dropped out. So I had to work really hard. Although I was a top student in high school, when I got to Brown, it was a very, very competitive school. So my background wasn't as strong as I had anticipated. So I had to make up for that loss. And so I spent a lot of time in the library, so much so that people would come and find me in the library. They knew where I was. So it required a lot of work.
Wow. Me too. People had to find me in the library, but that's mostly because I was a very slow learner. I mean, I have such a hard time memorizing or learning stuff. I actually felt like I had to study twice as hard to get half of the results as everybody else.
I feel that way too. But at the end of the day, as long as you pass your classes and you understand but it takes a lot of work, and you can feel like you are not a strong student. But what I find is the difference could just be hard work. And that's what you and I were both willing to do.
And okay, so how about discrimination? Do you ever? I guess you did, but I don't know. Could you share with us if you encounter discrimination in your day to day job?
Ooh, in my day-to-day job. Well, when I was at Yale, funny things would happen. I was in the mechanical engineering department. And so funny story, I'm at a faculty party. So everyone at the party is a professor or their spouse. And so I'm speaking to someone's wife, and she asked me where I'm from, and I said, "Well, I'm from the Department of Mechanical Engineering." And she says, "Oh, I just love what you've done with the air conditioning system." She couldn't figure out that it, I wasn't janitorial, or or someone who works on the facilities or the grounds. I was actually a professor. So I informed her that no, it's a department, and I informed what she was doing. But just the assumption, here I am, where the facts are that this room is full of people who are faculty, and she couldn't make that leap. So that's just one example of how it presents itself.
Wow. Okay. Well, I think you have the kind of personality that you take everything with good humor and doesn't let get to you. But that's a very funny example. Uh, how about writing? I mean, this is your third book, The Alchemy of Us. So at one
Mhm.
moment you decided that you would like to start sharing your knowledge with the rest of non-science people out there.
Well, I had been doing it for some time because I was a professor, and I really loved teaching. In fact, that was my favorite part of the whole job. I really didn't care for the other parts, to be honest. And I had always been looking for ways to make material science, which is my field, more interesting. And I had a very popular class when I was at Yale. A lot of people would take my class, even if they weren't even in the engineering department. I had art students come by, and all kinds of students just wanting to take part of this class because I made it fun. I did a lot of demonstrations, and I had great stories, and I was very personable. And so I already had this leaning already. But when I left Yale, I was still looking for ways to make material science interesting to people more broadly than the 30 students that I had. And so I thought writing books might be the way to do that. And I wrote Save Our Science, which was more about how I thought science education could be done best. And then I was teamed up with a sports writer to talk about American football to see how we can use that as a way to explain science. But it wasn't until about 2013 where I really wanted to do my own field, which was material science. And I was trying to figure out how to do that. And so that was what gave rise to the journey of bringing about the Alchemy of Us.
Wow. I've been doing and also you are a podcaster. You are also sharing your knowledge about science with a podcast. Am I right? And if so, can you tell us what is your podcast about?
Sure. I have a podcast. So it's called Science Underground, and I explain science topics in 2 minutes. And, you'll hear about things about why leaves change color, why snowflakes have six sides. And I really designed it to support teachers as a way to engage students. So I made it short, 2 minutes, so that it's something that you could play at the very beginning of class, pull students in, and then use the rest of the class time to kind of figure out, or to discover what the lesson's about. So I enjoyed podcasting. I really enjoyed it. In fact, I wish I had more time for it because there's just so many things I want to do. And I really love podcasters. There's such an open community. So I really enjoyed that space as a way to bring information and knowledge out into the world.
Wow. I've been having a few podcast episodes with some historians, and we have been talking about the end of the Cold War with Russia. And now that there seems to be a new sort of Cold War against China, and this war is in great part a scientific war. So I wonder and I don't know from my ignorance point of view, what is true, what is exaggerated, what is missing. What can you tell us about the science competition between the United States and China?
Well, it's real. I've been to China. They are ahead in a lot of departments. And they also, if you look at the leadership in China and if you look at the leadership in the United States, in the Chinese government, a lot of people have PhDs or some science background. In the United States, it's mostly lawyers. So different set of priorities. But the other thing is that, America always needs an enemy. And so we had Russia as an enemy. So now it's China. But some of it is real. We could do better. We could do a better job, particularly when it comes to science education and the general knowledge of science. And so if we want an enemy, if it's for good, in order as a way to inspire people to learn more, I think that's good. But it's always been a posture that America has had of having an enemy. So some of it is real and some of it is just fiction.
And how much is there of science collaboration? For example, we hear that with the coronavirus, a whole bunch of scientists from different countries were collaborating and helping each other in order to find a cure. And that also, I wonder how much of a collaboration was there, not only with China, but with other countries as well.
That's a good question, and I don't know the answer to it fully. I know that science in general is very collaborative, and I also know that, a science team will have people from various different backgrounds because that's how science is. But I don't know specifics for the coronavirus.
Okay, well, I have a listener. Her name is Cheryl Williams, and she was very upset. She says that women are not being recognized enough for their inventions. And she brought out two ladies. One, her name is Heidi Lamar, who, according to Wikipedia, invented what is a wireless communication or Wi-Fi. And the other one, Cecilia Payne, that also, according to Wikipedia, discovered that stars are made of hydrogen and helium. So she's saying, how come we hear about Einstein and I don't know, all these other male inventor, but we don't seem to give enough credit to the woman in science?
Well, your listener is very smart and astute because there is a lot of sexism in science, particularly in who we recognize as an inventor and who gets the prizes. I can think of many others. When it came to DNA, Rosalind Franklin actually took the picture of DNA, and that's what gave people the evidence of its shape of being the double helix. She gets no recognition. She has books and, there's plays about her, but in the science community, she didn't get the recognition that she deserved. Jocelyn Bell Burnell, she found pulsars when she was a graduate student. Her advisor went and got the Nobel Prize. So there are many, many examples of this, and it's actually called the Matilda effect. It's got a name for women not being recognized for their contributions in science, and we need to do a better job of doing that.
Okay, and do you think, I heard that there are more and more female graduates than men nowadays, or that's the trend anyway. Do you think within time women will get the recognition that they deserve?
Well, it's definitely depends on the field. Like there's some fields where there are a lot of women, like biology has a lot of women in it. Computer science, less so. What we need is more leadership. We need more women in leadership positions. We need more mentoring. We need men to get out of the way and, and stop, some of their backward thinking.
Or stealing their credit.
Yeah, stealing their credit. It happens all the time. I mean, you can be in a department meeting and a woman will say something and it's a smart idea. It doesn't get recognized. And then about 2 minutes later, a man will say the same thing and they'll be like, hey, that's a great idea. That happens all the time. And so it happens, on the subtle level of just being in a room with scientists. And then it happens on a bigger level of who gets promoted and who gets designated for awards. So it's persistent, it's pernicious, it's everywhere. And we must do everything in our power every time we see it to stop it.
Okay. So let's get into the subject of your book. What was the inspiration to write this book?
Well, I'm a material scientist, and most people don't know what that is.
Yes, me, I don't know what that is.
Yeah, even my mother doesn't know what it is.
I heard a song of Madonna calling herself a material girl.
That's right. So Madonna is a material scientist because she's a material girl and she lives in a material world. But most people don't know what the field is somewhere in between chemistry and physics. And it really is interested in all the things that are around us, all the stuff. People have made decisions for all the stuff that's around us, like why we use wood, why we use glass for different inventions. And what material scientists do is they learn as much about the material and see when it will perform well and when it will not. But because it's so important and because it's between two more well-known fields, chemistry and physics, it really doesn't get any attention. It's sort of like the middle child. We just don't pay attention to it.
Okay.
So I was looking for a way to bring that to the general public.
And you have done that with different chapters, different with different discovery. The first one is about time. You tell us the story of a woman who used to sell time for a living. And when I first saw that chapter, I thought, "Wow, that's interesting. A person selling time."
It sounds crazy. It sounds crazy, but well, when I found her, I just fell in love with this idea of a woman who's selling time. She was a woman in England in the 1800s, 1900s, named Ruth Belville, and she would go around town with her pocket watch, which had the time certified from the Royal Observatory, and walk around to businesses and factories that needed to know it, because the world wanted to know the time, but they didn't have access to the right time. You and I have access to the time. We could just look at our cell phones and our computers. But back in her day, people needed to know the time and didn't have it. So she provided this service, and she's the first person that you meet when you read The Alchemy of Us.
And the other surprising thing is that each little town used to have their own independent time from the other cities. So a little town, I don't know, a few kilometers from my town will have a different time.
Isn't that crazy? And then every time you travel, let's say you're in Chicago, if you go west or east, you have to change your watch by 1 minute, for every 13 miles. It's just crazy. But, and so, people were getting confused. They weren't making their appointments. Things weren't making their appointments. And so what we needed was a way to uniform timekeeping across the planet. And so that's when we had these 24 time zones across the entire planet. So that made things a little bit more uniform.
I heard that in Paris was the railway stations who kind of pushed to have this kind of uniform time format. Did I understand?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And that seems kind of bizarre. So imagine something like Twitter or Facebook just changing time. That's what the railroad was. The railroad was like Silicon Valley of the day. And, they had to print all these timetables. They had all these clocks on the wall telling people what time it was in different locations. And it was just very confusing because people didn't know what time their train was arriving. Was it local time? Was the time of the train where it departed from? It was just very confusing. And so they're the ones who set up this 4 time zone scheme in the United States. So it was a business that did that, not the government. And I just think that that's kind of amazing.
Wow. And is that also, like the church, I don't know if before that, the church had all these clocks on top, or like the Big Ben in London. Was that to inform everybody else of what time it was? Because I guess people didn't have a watch at that moment in time.
That's right. That was also to tell you the local time, and you would hear the ringing. And so maybe you didn't have a watch or you didn't know the precise time, but the ringing of Big Ben would tell you what time it was. If you go through small towns, you'll see in the town center, there's always a big clock. Either it's on top of near the church or on the green. That showed that the town was trying to be prominent, but also it was very important for people to know what time it was in that area. So clocks were very much part of the social fabric, the cultural fabric, and also architecturally important too.
Well, your book each chapter is full of surprises, but one at the beginning as well is this concept of, I don't know how to pronounce it, but that we used to sleep in 2 different cycles.
Yes.
And I still don't understand that. Why is it that we used to sleep in 2 different cycles?
Well, we slept in 2 different intervals. We would go to bed around 9 o'clock and sleep for about 3.5 hours. And then we'd wake up and stay up for about an hour and then go to sleep for another 3.5 hours. Now, some scientists actually think that is the natural way that humans should sleep. Because when we wake up in the middle of the night, people feel like they have insomnia or something, but it may actually be an echo to this old form of sleep. And what I talk about in The Alchemy of Us is how that old form of sleeping in 2 different parts, how that was transformed by technology, by the clock, because we had to get up early, and by artificial light, which allowed us to go to bed late. And soon it didn't make sense to sleep for those 2 small segments. So those 2 became pushed together. And that's kind of how we sleep now. So it's an old form of sleep.
But biologically, why do we used to have that kind of sleeping pattern?
Oh, that's a great question. Humans are probably one of the few mammals that actually sleep throughout the night. most other animals wake up for a little bit. So, I don't know all the details, but of why physiology, from our physiology of why that's the case. But people have studied many different mammals, and they've seen that a lot of them have this biphasic 2 segments of sleep.
Wow. Okay. Okay. So one more question. Of course, I'm not going to ask you about each one of those chapters in your book, but you mentioned that the telegraph itself influenced the way Hemingway wrote his novels. So that's a head scratcher right there.
It's a good word. Yeah, I mean, the telegraph had a limitation. It could only handle a certain number of messages each way. And so if you wanted to use a telegraph, you would be told to be brief. Use very short sentences, don't use words that don't mean anything, because they wanted to keep the lines available for future customers. Now, it ends up that the newspaper really loved the telegraph, and they used it for sending news all over the country, and editors would tell their reporters to be succinct because, again, this telegraph had a limitation. And Hemingway loved this style of short declarative sentences. And in America, everyone is taught to write like Hemingway, to not use adjectives and adverbs and just use nouns and verbs. And so Hemingway's style was actually influenced by the telegraph, and he went on to influence all these other people too. So I just found that to be extremely fascinating.
He could have invented Twitter himself.
That's right.
Jack Dorsey on the making.
Yeah, Jack Dorsey didn't. And actually, if you look, you'll see a lot of the words that we have in the United States. SCOTUS, the Supreme Court of the United States.
Yeah.
POTUS, President of the United States. Those terms came from the time of the telegraph. So the telegraph was creating idioms like we have today with OMG and IDK and all the others that we have.
And the emojis and all this and that.
All the emojis, yeah.
Okay, so we have 8 different chapters in your book. Is there anyone that you would like to share before we finish the podcast? An additional one?
Oh, yeah. Well, one of my favorites is about photography. And photography is something that, we all love. Billions of selfies are taken every year. But what I found out in the Alchemy of Us is that photography was actually a tool that people used to combat stereotypes. And it was actually a tool of oppression that 2 very young people found that Polaroid was using their film in nefarious ways, and they actually stopped that from happening. So, what I try to get across in the Alchemy of Us is that our technologies are fantastic, but sometimes they can go awry. And it's up to us to identify that and do something about it.
But how do we identify the way that it could go awry before the fact? I mean, let's say automobiles, okay? How could anyone have predicted that it would get so many people dying of, driving and texting?
No, that's a good question. It's a hard exercise. And, no one knew. Everyone thought that oil was forever, rubber was forever. Nobody was thinking about sustainability when Henry Ford was doing his automobile. But now we can just do thought experiments. We can just say, when you make something, you're like, okay, how can this be used in a wrong way? And if I do identify something, then maybe I can just change the design to make sure that doesn't happen. We're not always going to get it right, but it is an exercise that we should be doing because, well, we just don't do it. So we're not going to get it right, but it's something that we should at least explore.
Well, right now there is the scientific discovery of DNA editing, and everyone knows that there are a million things that can go wrong, and everyone seems to have that fear. Okay, how can we best utilize this new technology and not use it for nefarious thing? But at the same time, that question. People are not going to stop themselves from playing with DNA editing, and let's say there are certain laws in the United States and England and Australia. I don't know, that maybe the North Koreans start making weird experiments with DNA.
Right.
So it's almost like once the toothpaste is out of the tube, you cannot put it back.
It's true. And that gene editing software there is potential for someone to do some harm and to use it in a wrong way. And the structure is based on a scientist being moral. And so this is the reason why I'm saying that we need to teach more ethics in classes so that we develop that muscle for people to at least consider what are the outcomes or the consequences of their invention. We don't do that. We just kind of assume people to be nice people, and then we let them do science, and then they do things, and sometimes they do it in a wrong way, and we're surprised. We don't really set up a culture where we want people to use things for good. And that also, in order for us to have ethical inventions, we also need some oversight. There needs to be some kind of entity that just keeps an eye on things. We don't have that, and we certainly do need that now.
Right.
So there's a lot of opportunities here.
Well, you are a science evangelist. You are devoting your life to propagate the idea that we should love science. How can we help you?
Well, this podcast is great, and I just hope science becomes more a part of people's discussions and thinking. That's the reason why I wrote The Alchemy of Us. It's very conversational. It's not above people's heads. It's a lot of stories. It's a lot about people that you don't know. And that's actually how science operates. The science that you see that's over your head and you don't understand it and people are talking at you, that's not the kind of science that I want to be in. So I hope that people will embrace that science is for everyone, and just use it in their conversation. Think about things a little bit more deeply. Think about the science lens to things, and write great books, communicate science like I'm doing. That would be a great help to me.
Well, in your book, you humanize science. You make it feel like a character who is not only we created, but it also mold us and create us. So that's I found it and very easy to read, even for a person who knows very little about science, like myself. I wonder if you could just tell us one more time the title of the book and where can people follow you.
Sure. The name of the book is The Alchemy of Us: How Humans and Matter Transform One Another. It comes from the MIT Press, and it's available in all stores, indie stores. It's available as an ebook. Paperback comes out April 6, 2021. And there's also an audiobook, which you can download on your computer or you can get from your library.
Right.
So thank you so much.
You could learn science while you walk the dog.
That's right. While you're doing your laundry. So, listen to some great stories about people that you did not know, a whole lot of drama. You're going to feel a range of emotions too. So I hope that people really take some time to listen in.
Ainissa, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you.